many in the West are trying to compel, and that means virtually all of the European Union and definitely Zelensky, they have demanded that Russia first have a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. The Russians have answered that a lot, but it was again answered today by Sergei Lavrov.
Поэтому сейчас, когда нам говорят, вот давайте перемирие, а там посмотрим. Нет, ребята, мы уже были в этих историях, мы так больше не хотим, и Макроны, Стармеры, фон дер Ляйены и прочие деятели Европы, которые сейчас истерично требуют от Соединенных Штатов присоединиться к антироссийским действиям и нарастить количество санкций, это просто их выдает с головы.
And the Russians are saying, we have the military capacity that we don't have to do that, and we're going to continue on. Gary, if you could throw that full screen up there that Lavrov, when he added, I think this was actually earlier in the week, he said, Russia will not leave the Orthodox people of Ukraine in trouble and ensure that their legitimate rights are respected and canonical Orthodoxy regain its place in the spiritual life of the people of the Ukraine lands. That guarantees the guarantee that these goals will be achieved is the position of the Russian Federation. That tells us, in my view, and you tell me if you have a different interpretation, he's not just talking about like just ending the war on the current line of contact. He's not even talking about just the administrative borders of the 4 oblasts, but there are large numbers of Russian-speaking people on the other side of the current line of contact, on the other side of those 4 oblasts, especially between the river Dnieper and the current line of contact. And he specifically said the Ukrainian people in those territories will be protected. Does that imply to you that they're thinking more ambitiously than merely stopping the war where it's at right now?
I'd be surprised if they weren't. And that's the danger we face, and that's the danger that we need to bring into the deal making and the ceasefire negotiations. What triggers are there going to be to protect those people in those particular regions from further Russian aggression, and what will be the triggers, or what will be the bits in the deal which says if you do this, then X is going to happen, and is X enough of a deterrent to Russia not to do that? And that's the bit that would need to be in any sort of future deal, really.
And in fact, there are a lot. Gary, if you can go to that last full screen, there is a lot of people in the Russian, not just the social media field, but even the regular media field that are saying, hey, you know what? Let's don't go to this the current line of contact. Don't even consider it. If you don't give us everything we're asking, we'll go all the way to the Dnieper River. And in fact, in this particular article here, it said, according to the Russians, Ukrainian sources, this is the Russian media, the Russian delegation, this was when they met together for the first time in Istanbul, the first time in 3 years, put forward extremely harsh conditions to Kiev, demanding not only the withdrawal of the armed forces from the territory of those 4 regions, but also the creation of a security zone in the Sumy region. Otherwise, Moscow warned that it would establish control over Sumy and Dnipro I never can say that word, right? Dnipro regions by force. And of course, many are saying that there could be some of the media in both the West and Europe were reporting that the delegation actually told the Ukrainian side, you either agree to the 5 here, including Crimea, or it'll be 8 territories and oblasts. So first question is, do you think Russia actually has the capacity to do that, or is it just an empty threat?
When I read that, it struck me as a classic sort of Russian Soviet tactic of asking maximalist requests and demands, and then when you get a negotiation, then you start trying to negotiate back down from that, but that they will end up with something which they didn't have before. It might not be as much as they wanted in the first place, but in terms of whether or not they have the capacity still to do it, the military-industrial complex continues to function. We know that they're pumping. We all know that they continue to pump money into defense, and the military-industrial complex continues to deliver. So in answer to your question, I think they probably would have the capability and capacity to do it, but it would just go into another grinding attritional sort of period, and whether or not Ukraine could sustain that, or whether we can sustain that, in our support for Ukraine is the bigger question. And
Well,
I
and
think,
yeah, that's actually
frankly,
I think
beyond this year, and with Trump's statements as well, with Trump's current statements, and beyond the end of this year, and financial impacts to us, I don't think we can.
Well, and that's why, because I asked you if you thought the Russia had the capacity to make good on that. Apparently, they have the capacity to try at the very minimum. But the problem on the other side is I don't know that the demands made by Zelensky that I put up there a second ago, I'm not sure he has the capacity realistically to even try to do that. For example, they are having huge problems with manpower, just having enough people to even steal off the streets, much less recruit, to actually offset losses. And apparently right now they are in a dearth. They don't have enough to offset daily losses in there. But maybe as important is that Europe in its whole cannot provide enough of the key weapons, ammunition, and other logistics that they need to continue fighting. And there has been no additional American money even contemplated after this Biden stuff runs out, that first was issued a year ago this month, actually, in May of 2024. And so that's kind of on the way out. There's still some of that rolling in, some of the tail end of it, but there's no more. And there have been some reports that I've seen of late that says that that by maybe 3 to 4 months from now, if everybody keeps fighting on the Ukraine side, that they may get into some kind of a critical low on the amount of ammunition to even continue to offer coherent resistance, to continue fighting, i.e. they won't be able to just go on for a number of years because they don't have the inputs that the Russian side does. How do you see that dynamic?
Well, I think you've just argued our way into a simple statement, which is it's time to do a deal, because the way you've just described it there, I completely buy into that. And as uncomfortable and as unpleasant as it is, it's time to do a deal, to try and get some deal, try and get some ceasefire, to get a ceasefire and some deal in place, because I think as you're basically saying Ukraine can't do it without us. I don't think we're able to do it because I don't think financially, politically, we're in a position to do it. And we talk about a coalition of the willing and putting peacekeepers on the ground and people monitoring, all that feels a bit wishy-washy to me as well. There's been no sort of clear end state as to what that looks like. What happens if Russia attacks those particular troops, whether it be UK, French, German, or whatever? Again, it just feels like a repetition of the last 3 or 4 years of good sounding rhetoric, but not backed up absolutely to the max, militarily and financially, to enable Ukraine to win. And so we just go on perpetuating the just enough, just in time, or not enough and not in time. And so how much longer do you go on doing that for? And that's a question I can't answer, but it feels to me like it's time. We're getting to the point where we need to do a deal, and a deal needs to be struck.
In the last of the amount of time we have left, I wonder if you can, and I'm just going to be asking you for your best assessment because you can't see into the future, but if specifically within Great Britain, Keir Starmer and really everybody before him, all the way up, since the war started, were always just unequivocal. Yes, we're going to give Russia, at the time they said Ukraine, everything it wants for as long as it takes. And that obviously was never defined, as long as it takes to do what. So they're continuing on. But here's the problem. As we're discussing here, the at least significant possibility is that if we continue on with the status quo, at some point, the Ukraine defense could literally collapse. And if it does, then that's going to put the British government in a really tough spot, because what do they do then? They've been just backing this stuff to the hilt and at least rhetorically saying that they're going to continue to support everything. But if there comes to the point to where the defense crumbles, how is the Britain going to get itself out of the rhetoric that it's put itself in today?
Good question. We have, without doubt, I think, in the last 10 or 11 years, really backed ourselves into a corner, out of which it's very difficult to sort of change the rhetoric and change the narrative of UK's position. So we have rightly been on Ukraine's side, and we've been in their corner, but almost to the exclusion of everything else, and any sort of, as I've seen it, meaningful dialogue with Russia on how to sort of bring this crisis to an end. And we've got to the position now where we simply, I don't think we can afford to go on and continue. So somehow or other, we've got to try and work out our lines to off-ramp. Maybe that's a bit of a strong word, but off-ramp a little bit in terms of how in finding a way to strike a deal going forwards and try and bring peace and stop this war.